everybody, what's up? We are back with another episode of the Controversial Truth Podcast, and we're continuing in our series on church structure. Today's episode is going to be a little bit more controversial, I think. We might have some people that strongly disagree with us, but we're going to say what we're going to say. So anyway, the first part of this is going to be kind of like a two-parter because we kind of broke it up. Well, I guess it just happened to break up this way. The first part is going to be on the direct question of should pastors be paid for their position, or elders, as we discussed last week. And then also the second part of this is going to be about deacons and their role in the church. So we'll get started on this fun topic that probably get some disagreement with. But anyway, some of the scriptures. So we'll start off
with some reading.
With the reading. So, well, I guess, yeah, let's do that. Okay, so the first passage I have here is, to give some context, it's Paul talking, and this is in 1 Corinthians 9:12 through 18, and he's just talking to the churches kind of about sharing of materials and stuff and money and some different things like that. But it says here, if others have a share in the claim over you, shouldn't we even more? Nevertheless, we did not use this right, but we put up with all the things so that we cause no hindrance of the good news of Messiah. Don't you know that those who perform the holy services eat from the temple, and those who wait on the altar receive a share at the altar? So the Lord ordered those who proclaim the good news to get their living from the good news. So that's all I'll read for right this second. So basically, my understanding of this particular topic, Paul makes it pretty clear that pastors have a right to get paid to an extent. Now, he sets the bar and sets the example very high by saying, I'm not going to take any money, though.
Yeah.
I'm going to not take that because, in that passage that I just read, he said it is a hindrance to the gospel or the good news of Messiah. Yep. So, and I think we've seen that. We've seen that so many times. Like,
yeah, expand on that. Like, how can it be a hindrance?
Well, you see, when you talk to somebody, for instance, that's not a Christian, they go, well, I don't understand why you have to tithe. I don't understand why pastors get paid. It doesn't make any sense to me that they take all this money. You see, and then you see it work its way, the greed work its way into the church, and you see pastors taking way more than they ever should have, even with what the Bible calls their right, to take certain things. So, and in this relation to the things that Paul's talking about here, that are things that are actually permissible and acceptable, or as he puts, their right to take, it's not talking about necessarily a full-time salary. It's talking about necessary provisions like food, shelter, those sorts of things. And you see that commonly, like he would accept, when they would go around, it even says, if you go down further in that passage, we'll read a little bit, that they'll take food, when it's given, take whatever food is given to you, take whatever shelter is given to you. And that sort of thing is definitely fine. But we find ourselves in a place in our church today where pastors are getting paid six-figure salaries and all sorts. What's that?
Is that not around here?
No, probably not around here. I'm talking. These are like mega churches, obviously. Sure. But I think there's definitely something to be said, and obviously Paul knew this, for not accepting that money that was due him because of the above and beyond gesture that it gives. He poured his life out and then still didn't even ask for anything in return. And some people, I didn't know this actually, I think you shared it with me up in like a year or so ago, in Acts 18:3. I'll read that real quick. It just gives a little glimpse, because some people, myself included, when I was first learning about this, I was like, well, okay, he didn't make any money. He didn't ask for money. How did he make his money? And in a passage completely irrelevant to anything to do with money or tithe or anything like that, we catch a glimpse into what Paul is doing here to make money. And it says, there he found a Jewish man named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all Jewish people to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, him being Paul, he stayed with them and began working, for by trade they were tent makers. So right here we see that Paul was a tent maker, and that we could only assume is how he made his money for all of his many travels throughout the different places that he went throughout all of Rome and, Asia when he was there and different places. So do you think pastors should follow that example?
Yeah.
Pretty blunt. So you don't think pastors should be paid at all, or do you think?
I think pastors should be elders.
Well, yeah.
I think elders should be. I think they should follow his example.
Right.
He laid out the fact that he was entitled, kind of, to
certain things,
payment. But there's a reason he chose to not take it. Mm-hmm. The hindrance can be, he said, I want to be like he wanted to give the word for free.
Right.
Like, multiple times he's like, I gave you the word free of charge. Mm-hmm. And this is why I did that. He said he didn't want to be a peddler, I think is the word he used, of the word. Let me see. 2:17. For we are not like so many peddlers of God's word, but as men of sincerity, as commissioned by God in the sight of God, we speak in Christ. So he said he's commissioned by God.
Right.
He didn't want payment from the church. And that was for a few reasons. He didn't want, especially the early church, they didn't have money. Mm-hmm. Like they could barely support people, and you can find that in 1 Thessalonians and Philemon. He didn't want to put any unnecessary hardship or burden on a church, like to begin with. So if they were taking care of their people, he didn't want them to be like, oh, we also have to pay Paul. Mm-hmm. He also didn't want to cause a hindrance to the gospel's acceptance. Mm-hmm. So like if you see, just like you said, like today, like if a non-Christian sees a pastor preaching the word, he's like, he's getting paid to do it, though.
Yeah, of course he has.
Of course, he's getting paid. So like Paul realized that, and he's like, if I am presenting this word for free every day, then clearly I'm not in it for the money. Like I believe this, and this is what I find to be true and worth my time, even though I'm not getting paid for it. Yeah. So not getting paid also, increases the legitimacy of what you're saying because you're not getting paid to do it. So it doesn't hinder the gospel's acceptance, and because some people would assume that he was in it for the money. Yeah. And that's found in 1 Corinthians 9:12 and also 2 Corinthians 2:17 and 7:2. Also, he wanted that money to go to other stuff. If a church doesn't need to give him money, that church could use that money for something else. Right. Which, I think he's right. And I think he was right to turn it down and provide him work for himself, or find a job for himself so he could provide for himself, so that money could go towards other things and it didn't interfere with the gospel. And I think that's a good example that he set. Yeah. And he said he made enough to support himself, and any excess that he had from supporting himself, he gave to people in need. Mm-hmm. So I think that completely goes against, the modern financial details of pastors. And I think people should follow that. Like I think a pastor can get paid to an extent, kind of like you said, like food. If you want to give a pastor, enough for a payment, enough for food, shelter. I think a church should house a pastor. A lot of churches do that. They're like, there's a house connected to the church. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good thing. But as for like a yearly salary, that's kind of much higher than a living wage. Mm-hmm. I don't really believe that. Especially when like there's a lot of churches, when they're interviewing a new pastor, there's like a part of the process is like negotiating salary, and I don't think this is like, they should be like, this is a living wage and we know it is. We'll provide you housing. This is how much food costs. If you want anything more than that, work for it. Yeah. Provide for it.
One note on that as well, which kind of goes back to last week's topic. And we intentionally did last week's topic first about churches needing to be smaller and broken down more, because nowadays, a lot of times with these bigger churches, a pastor could not have the time possibly to work a job to provide any extra income for his family and take on the pastorate that's expected him by these churches. But if we actually structured the churches the way that they were meant to be structured,
elders
and spread it out, you wouldn't actually have a full-time job. I don't think it's really meant to be a full-time job for any one man. I think it's meant to be more of a part-time job, if I'm using more just like a broad base of hours.
If you're spreading out the pastoral responsibilities over 4 people, those 4 people can both work for themselves and do the duties of pastor and take on the burdens of the church.
Exactly, and spread it out amongst themselves. And so, because I think a lot of the rebuttal would be here when people hear that, when pastors or even people, just people in general would hear this and they go, well, pastors have their work cut out for them. There's no way they could work 2 jobs. You know what I'm saying?
See the last episode.
Right, see the last episode if you didn't watch this one, because I would agree, if a pastor's job scripturally was to do the job that a pastor in the American church is doing, then there would be no way for them to work another job. The church would have to provide all of their income, but I don't think that's not the pastor's job. So let's see last week's episode if you're confused by that. But there is place and time for people, specifically evangelists, to get paid not only for their housing and their food, but also an actual, what you would maybe call a salary these days, because of their circumstance not being, in a set location. They're going from place to place constantly. And so they wouldn't really be able to hold down a job.
The reference for that would be, so the rebuttal, a lot of people use 1 Corinthians 9:14, and I think Philemon 4:10 through 16. I think it's Corinthians that says those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel.
Yep. That's what I just read at the beginning.
And that's talking more about the people that are going place to place, and they can't settle down to get a stable job to provide. Like Paul, when he settled down, he still found stuff to do. But when he settled down long enough to get a job, he got the job. But that's more geared towards missionaries, which we absolutely should provide for missionaries, because I don't expect a missionary to go and then get a job and hop place to place to place.
Yeah, of course.
And all that. So,
and the other thing too is, as far as pastors being paid, we mentioned houses and providing food. I don't think that we need to necessarily go down so far that we're saying okay, we'll give you this specific house and we'll give you this specific food. We're going to go pick your groceries up for you. I think giving them enough money to get a house and to get, pay for their food is fine. Just give it to them in money form. They don't actually have to have everything picked out for them. But definitely, it's just, it's so much of a hindrance to the gospel, like Paul said, to take that money, when you should have plenty of time to work.
Yes.
And we see that all over it's a regular thing to just know that, crook pastors and stuff like that is just a wide...
People already think that the church is a business and Christianity is just a money-making machine.
Yep. And then you got to think too, the Bible obviously calls us to tithe and to give offerings as Christians, not just, as every Christian. And so that doesn't mean that, we have to ultimately go from the place of God is going to provide for us, right? So if you're relying on God to provide for you and you take a pastoral job that pays the bare minimum that's going to get you food and shelter, then you can rely on the offering as well, because offerings are something that is going to be above and beyond
the extra,
So somebody comes along and they're like, hey, I feel called to give you $100 this week.
Yeah.
And that's totally different than the tithe is what is the set amount that somebody's giving to the church. And then that would be where the salary would come from, or the payment that would come from for the pastor. But the offering, that's extra. So those things are definitely something that even Paul says to accept those.
Yeah.
So
if offered to you.
If offered, right. Yeah. But you just shouldn't expect them.
No, you shouldn't expect to join the church as a pastor and be like, all right, I want this salary.
Yeah.
This. And you should, personally, I think you should follow Paul's example. Mm-hmm. But if you choose to not do that, because he does say, he has the right to those things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you choose it, you exercise that right.
That, and I also think that, at least me personally, if I was ever going to take on a pastoral or elder position in a church, it would be strictly by the leading of the Holy Spirit. It would be because I felt like God was saying, go to this church, be a part of this church, and do this job. And so by no means in any universe would I say, nah, God, you're not providing me enough money for this job. Depends on how much they
offer me first.
Yeah.
Like, let's see the number.
Right, exactly. Like that just seems like if you were like going for a pastor job and you said to the congregation who was trying to hire you, and obviously I would hope you're there because you felt led by the Spirit, and you said no to turn down a job that God gave you because it wasn't paying enough. Lord help you.
Yeah. No, I like Paul's example. I like that he says that he's doing it for free. He doesn't want to be a peddler of God's word, and he's commissioned by God.
Right.
And I think that's a good example to follow. I mean, we're doing this for free.
Yeah.
Like this is our own time. Like this, what we're talking about means so much to us that we'll take time out of our day and money out of our pockets to
all the
do
money
this.
We spent to start the thing, get all the equipment.
And it would mean less if someone was like, hey, we'll give you whatever amount of money to do a podcast and talk about God. And I'd be like, sure. Like it doesn't mean as much if you're doing it, if your motivation is money.
Right. Exactly.
Or even if you could, even someone from the outside possibly think that their motivation was financially based.
Yep. You got anything more on that specific topic, or should we move on to the deacons?
Let me see. I might have a little bit more.
Okay.
I had 1 Thessalonians something. 2:9. Let's see. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil, we worked day and night, that we may not burden any of you while we proclaim the gospel of God. So,
yeah, there's like Paul again saying
any amount of his free time was spent working, so he didn't burden anybody.
Right, and that kind of ties into the whole family thing, because like, you have to be careful also balancing family life.
He was also single.
But he was single, so that's why you kind of have Paul saying in some of his letters, like, I wish none of, it's good for you to be married, but at the same time, he's like, I wish that you wouldn't, because that enabled him to be able to pursue the gospel full time, which if that's the case, then awesome. I mean, for most people, it's not an option to not get married.
Yeah.
Because that's also, I mean, there's place in the kingdom for married people, and there's place in the kingdom for non-married people like Paul that would just pursue the gospel full time.
Yeah.
But we also have to be careful when we heed his words, seeing him say like, oh, I work day and night. Like, it's not good for a man to work day and night and abandon his family.
No, not his family. Yeah.
Right. So we have to be careful and clarify there and stay centered in the road.
Some possible like consequences and stuff of paying your pastor like a salary, which is, I don't know. If your pastor has a salary and your church isn't even open to restructuring the pastoral system with elders and stuff, I don't have a problem with him getting money if he really is working a full day. If he's like if he does a sermon and he's like planning the next sermon and he's visiting the sick and those in jail and the hungry and he's like doing a full time taking calls, then that's a full time position.
Yeah, of course.
I understand that, but aside from that, I agree with it. But some of the consequences are that like other churches that are just paying their pastors like some churches have like, oh, whatever percentage we get, we'll give to you, or here's your salary number, and it's just some like absurd numbers. A lot of churches don't really consider how much of that extra money that the pastor doesn't need that you're giving him, like what that could go to. Like that could go to missions, that could go to outreach, that could go to the hungry and sick, and like a ton of helping your actual members and what they're going through if you know them well enough to know that they would for sure have struggles that money could help. Let's see, it'd free up a lot of money. So this kind of touches on how Paul said he didn't want his payment to be a hindrance. I put salesmen tend to be extra nice towards those whom they hope to sell something. Hiring a career clergyman puts him in a similar position, a customer salesman relationship, and that this no doubt to some degree affects his dealings with his congregation. what he preaches may be affected by wanting to keep those who pay him happy.
Yeah.
So like if you're on a payroll and you're not working for yourself, you might not preach on certain things. Like you might not touch on hell. You might not talk about God's wrath. You might not talk about all these other things that might upset the people that are paying you.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. This is similar to, you said some pastors or some churches structure it so that a pastor gets a percentage of whatever's income comes in, and that's a very dangerous thing to do because
you just got to bump up those numbers.
Yeah, it's basically like a, rather than even having a salary, it's you're getting paid by the sale, basically, So that's a very dangerous thing, and that ties right in with what you were saying. If they're getting paid, even in general, even a set salary, then they're subject to potentially falling into the temptation of catering to people rather than catering to God.
Yeah, saying what people want to hear, like tickling their ears, saying what they want to hear, what might hype them up or put them in a good mood and reward you for whatever feelings you made them feel, as opposed to saying what they need to hear and what you need to say and stuff that might upset them, but it needs to be said.
We have to be of the mindset that if the churches lose people because the message was preached, then that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of churches are at the opposite mindset of that, where they want to build the church so badly. And it's probably mostly out of good intentioned places, but it really just ends up being counterproductive. And you just basically just quote the scriptures, you make twice a son of hell as yourself. So if you've got pastors that are preaching watered down, irrelevant gospels that don't actually lead to salvation, to grow the numbers, even if it's out of a good intention place, it doesn't help anyone.
Yeah. And the love of money would be a natural, like an assumed consequence of if your payment depends on what you say. Yeah. Then you're going to eventually it'd be hard to not become greedy. Yep. And alter your sermon to, I don't know, boost those numbers. Yeah. Both your bank account and like the people in the seats, and those shouldn't be affected. And that's all. Again, not that it's wrong to, you do have a right to some of those things, but clearly Paul didn't want any part of it. And he's like, I'm going to stay as far away from that as possible and just work for myself and provide for myself.
And I find it funny too, like even just on my own scale, and obviously I'm not a pastor or an elder, so I don't necessarily understand it firsthand, but for me personally, I can't stand when people take care of me. Yeah. I like to provide for myself. I don't like it when people try to give me money. Like I would just prefer, maybe it's just pride, I don't know, but I would prefer to just make my own money.
I mean, the Bible talks about that. Like, we're using your hands, working with your hands and providing for yourself. And while if someone's like, hey, Greg, you're Pastor Greg, you're doing good work. You work for yourself. Here's a gift, or here's something. You could for sure take that. Yeah, of course. And but yeah, I can't imagine either. If I was in that position, I would do my best to. Well, I'd be a part of a church that has, elders, and that all of that is spread out, and we can all work for ourselves and stuff. But I wouldn't.
So when you start in church,
I don't know. And but I would try to follow. I would try to follow Paul's example of what he did, because I assume that's the best example, and clearly it's not free of consequence, but it's the best option. I would say.
I would agree, because the early church grew the fastest, and they were actually foundationally secure, and it allowed for the advancement of the gospel throughout the entire world in a fairly short amount of time. I feel like if we were growing at the rate that they were growing, like true numbers, now I think the whole world would be saved.
Yeah, it'd be global.
Yeah, like everyone would be like, all right, we're on board with this thing. Yeah. But it's just gotten so watered down and different. So
those are my thoughts. I'd follow that example. Yeah. And give people less to point to. Like they already dislike Christianity if they're not a believer, pretty much, and
for all the wrong reasons most of the time too. Like if you're going to be disliked as a Christian, be disliked for preaching the gospel. Don't be disliked for being dishonest and hoarding money and all those other things. Exactly. So anyway, I guess we'll move on then to the next part of today's episode, since we broke this up.
A different role.
We talked
about pastors and how pastors are elders, are overseers.
Yep.
But from what I've seen, according to the Bible, there's only like 2 positions in the roles in the church.
Like designated roles, yeah. I mean, you've got like prophets, you've got
I don't know, not authority, but like just positions in the church.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Not like
excluding like prophet, evangelist, like those different types of
gifts
roles,
or things like that.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, so now we're gonna go into deacons.
Well, what my translation just flat out says the more accurate translated version of it, which is just servant leaders.
That is what it is.
Yeah. So that's basically what it boils down to, I guess, is just that servants within the church. So actually, I've got that.
What do you got, 1 Timothy?
Yeah, I'll just read it. Yeah, the same thing as we were reading from last week. It's just a continuation of that. There in 1 Timothy.
I've got that summed up. 3:8 through 13.
Yeah. So, yeah, again, my translation here says servant leaders. Most of them will say deacons.
Yeah.
Servant leaders likewise must be dignified. Likewise, this is right after what we read last week about pastors or elders. So servant leaders likewise must be dignified, not double speaking, not addicted to much wine, not greedy for dishonest gain. They must keep hold of the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience. Also, let them first be tested. Then let those who are blameless serve as servant leaders. Women likewise must be... Oh, sorry, this goes on. So that goes on to a new part. So we'll stop there.
Yeah.
I find it interesting here. Actually, I just noticed this now. This is also let them first be tested.
Yep.
And that had nothing... That particular part... Because all of these qualifications for deacons and elders are pretty much the same. And then I just noticed that that's actually not in the part for the pastor or the elder. Also let them first be tested, which is strange because you would think that the elder would be the one that you would want to put more to the test. But in this circumstance, the deacon...
Why do you think that is?
Well, venturing a guess right now is because if they're called servant leaders, being the servant...
I have a guess. I want to see if yours is the same guess.
Yeah, so my guess is that... Do you think tested in like a sense of because they're going to be going out to other people's houses and stuff like that? You're worried about like sexual sin and stuff? Is that where
No, I was thinking more like tested to see if they're a true believer, know the word, but they're also going to be, since they're the servant, they're going to be kind of designated to deal with like now we have a treasurer usually in most churches, but I think that was part of that responsibility was combined with the deacon at that time. So like their character probably needed to be tested because they actually are dealing with
money giving
and
money
stuff
to
like that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. More along the lines of making sure that they were actually some of the most trustworthy and honest people with the money. And it wasn't even money at that time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, that's when you're serving people, a lot of times, that's some of the most strenuous times is when you're trying to help somebody, especially if they, if they're not receiving it graciously and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So being able to know how to navigate certain situations. So I would imagine you would want those people to not only be well versed in biblical knowledge and sound, but also of good character. Yeah. So yeah, that is interesting. I happen to notice that.
Yeah. So I got, let's see. Yeah. The Greek word for deacon just suggests, it's the notion of service and servanthood. Mm-hmm. And that's found in John 2:5, Romans 15:8, Matthew 20:26, Luke 10:40, and Acts 11:29. Yeah, and it's specifically usually, especially in regard to providing practical help with respect to the basic necessities of life. So that their biggest thing was helping those in need of food, water, shelter, clothing, as well as ministering through hospitality. If like someone needs a place to stay, the deacon should be the first to be like, you can stay at my place. Like he wants them to stay there. So they were kind of like the basic necessities of the congregation, or whatever, stuff like that.
Yep. So you asked me in the last episode more of a practical question, I think, in regards to what something looked like. What the pastor, what a Sunday service would look like in regards to the pastor or the elders' roles switching and stuff. So what do you think on a practical level in today's society a deacon would be doing during a service or throughout the week.
During a church service? I have no idea. Maybe like welcoming people.
Yeah.
Instead of like having like, oh, this is our greeter, and like their only job is to say, hi, welcome to whatever church. That should probably be like a deacon's job also. Right. Like they should be welcoming people.
Getting
like,
to know
do you need
people.
anywhere to sit? Do you need anything at all? Introducing yourself, introducing your family, stuff like that. Probably on a Sunday, but during the week, probably it's the same stuff. Like, what does the congregation need? Food? Does anyone need water, shelter, a place to stay? Does a relative of theirs need a place to stay? Are they going through anything? Does anyone need to be visited, prayed for, anything like that? And it's to take care of the physical and logistical needs of the church, so the elders can concentrate on their primary calling of teaching.
Yeah.
So like that, they're the people. The deacons are the people that should be handling all of that. So the elders can focus on their own jobs, their own families, and the teaching. So they're taking care of everything else.
Yeah. And do you think? And I'm actually asking this because I have a guess, but I want to hear your answer.
Sure.
As far as the provisions that they're providing to people, is that something that's coming out of their own pocket, or is that something that's coming from a collection within the church that has been given from the tithes and offerings?
Both.
Okay.
I'd say your church should know the congregation well enough, and they should be familiar with each other. Like there shouldn't just be like cliques and cliques and cliques and like groups of people that everyone in that group knows each other, but like the whole church as a whole should know each other's wants and needs and stuff like that. And so if like one person in the church needs financial help, the entire church should want to get together and do something for that group. And the deacon should just be in charge of making sure that happens for that person. But also just being a Christian, if that deacon encounters a time where his own, he can help someone financially just some random day on his own, he should do that also.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. You brought it up, I think, when we were done filming the last episode about, how like, and it's a point that's kind of relevant to this particular part of the topic, is how churches need to stop looking for outside the doors for their roles, their elders, their pastors, their deacons.
Was that before?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think it was when we were done filming the last episode. We talked about it. And I just had this kind of thought about like the kind of the trajectory of what that will actually look like if actually done properly. And so if churches would actually do like what you were saying, where they would, instead of hiring a pastor from who knows where, they would just build men up to take on that pastoral role when another elder decides that they get called somewhere else, or they end up dying or passing on, whatever, and then you have that more of inclusive where you're moving up through the so-called ranks, you know what I mean? And I even see that like on a level, like the whole premise of the Christian life is to be satisfied in Christ, right? And so when we come in as a Christian, as a baby Christian, a lot of times we're dependent on people around us to feed us, spiritually. And a lot of times too, that ends up being a physical thing too. Like you come into the kingdom and you really, you haven't maybe learned good work ethic or something like that because you're new to the kingdom, and work ethic is something that is a kingdom practice. We should be, like you said, working with our hands, able to provide for ourselves because of our desire to not be a burden on other people. And so these are all things that even a Christian, not an elder, just any Christian should be learning and understanding. So as the progression of a Christian's life and walk with Christ gets more and more, and they're more and more satisfied in Christ and not needing other people, then you have this structure of a church that no longer needs to feed. Once you get to a certain place, you no longer need to feed the people within the congregation on a regular basis, and it's all just outreach to people who don't know Christ. And then you bring them in and you raise them up. You bring them in, you raise them up. But we have this cycle within the American church, I think, and maybe broader than American church, where people are still so broken within the church that we spend all our time just catering to people within the church. And we should cater to people within the church. They need to be taken care of, but that's only for a time. Only for a time. And then they need to be getting up on their feet and, like Paul says, not drinking milk anymore and moving on to meat,
Solid food.
Solid food.
Yeah, I think the church definitely needs to work on raising up church leaders. Instead of just like, this is the sermon each week. Take it in, go about your jobs.
Yeah.
Not, the Bible says, I think it's Paul. He's like, it was what you were just talking about you keep getting milk, like you want milk or you need milk and you should be the solid food by now.
Mm-hmm.
Around there in that passage, he's talking about, like you should be teachers by now. Yeah. Like I keep giving you the same basics. Like you should be mature in your faith. You should be teaching by now. And not enough churches. I think we need to change the church, and instead of just giving a sermon each week, like we're investing. You need to know that you're trying to invest in your members, not just like so they live good Christian lives, but so they can plant churches. Like pastors need to be preaching to raise pastors. Like, they should be pastors that you should, like you said, I said before we started that instead of like, oh, we need a pastor, let's go put a search out for one. That shouldn't be a thing.
Right.
Like you should have several options that you groomed kind of from a young age. And same thing with deacons. Like if someone's not like called to be an elder or whatever, there should be several men who have been groomed and raised and to be deacons, and they're ready for that position instead of just kind of, I don't know, feeding people each week, whatever they want to hear and stuff like that. We should have elders and deacons at the ready once the ones that are established either move on or die or something.
I think that's one of the disservices too of the culture. I think we've kind of created this mindset within the church that only certain people can do the jobs described in the Bible. Yep. It's only a certain breed of Christian that does this.
I have that written here too.
And that's absolutely true of individual roles, but every Christian is called to a higher office of some kind, a higher point. You're always supposed to be going up. It doesn't necessarily mean that every Christian is going to be a teacher. Obviously, we know from the word that it's not every Christian is going to be a deacon, but every Christian should be aspiring to be, like you said, coming up to at least be able to be teachers in a family scale, and that doesn't necessarily mean of a church, but every Christian should be equipped, right, to give a defense for their faith and to actually go above and beyond just living a normal Christian life. And we've kind of severed that from the general population of Christians and said, like, no, leave it to the professionals. The people that have gone to college for it, the people that have spent time in ministry, on studying under somebody. But the rest of you guys just come and listen to us and give us money.
Yeah, it says not all are called to be teachers. It doesn't say not all are called to have the knowledge of a teacher. Right. Like that's something I firmly believe, that the pastor doesn't necessarily have to be on such a higher level than everybody else in the church. Like,
I would go even further to say that it says not all are called to be teachers, but it doesn't even say that all aren't called to teach. Like, you can still teach
on a small
scale within, you should still
witnessing
have the knowledge.
Teaching.
Right, exactly. That's what, but teacher,
as for like a role, like a position or a profession or whatever. I definitely think whatever church I go to, that pastor shouldn't necessarily have a greater intelligence of the Bible than me. Like we should all, he said you should all be teachers by now. Like we shouldn't forever need to be fed. Like we should be sharpening by other people. We should be sharpening. We should all reach a point where we're just sharpening each other and then feeding those who need to be fed, raising them up to a point where they are just sharpening one another. And it's not just, let's just constantly, everyone shouldn't just always need to be fed. Especially like the simplest things. We just need to raise them up. But also, it's not just like the deacon's job. It is the deacon's job to do those things, like provide for the church and put money where it needs to go and make sure people are getting what they need. But that's like, it's not only his job.
No, it's
his job to do that, but he's just he's a
servant leader.
Yes,
that's why I like that translation. It's it doesn't say servant. It's a servant leader, and so it's the insinuation there is that every Christian is a servant. You've got the deacons,
the example that everyone else should follow. If they're not aspiring to become a teacher, they should be aspiring to live a deacon life. Pretty much.
Absolutely,
and it's serving in any way they can. So like that is the deacon's job. But you shouldn't, if like I'm in a church and I'm like, oh, that person needs food, I shouldn't just be like, oh, I'll let the deacon handle it.
Yeah,
like, you should
you see the need, and you have the means to accommodate the need, accommodate it.
and they, as far as roles, like elders, and I don't like saying pastors anymore. If you haven't heard me catch myself like 5 times, elders and deacons. The main difference between elder and deacon is a difference of gifts and callings, not of character. Mm-hmm. Like, so the qualifications, if you look at them side by side, they're pretty much the same. Yeah. Like, worthy of respect, honorable, sincere, not hypocritical, sober, not pursuing dishonest gain, blameless. Mm-hmm. Not that they're perfect or sinless, but like you can't like dig up stuff on them that's like, oh, they're not living a good Christian life. One wife, stuff like that. Like all the qualifications and kind of the check boxes are the same, but the only difference is their calling. Like once the elders aren't higher than deacons, it's a different role. Yeah. It's just a different calling, and both very important and required in the modern church. They both needed, and I think deacon is one that we more have correct. It's still pretty closely aligned to what it was in the early church. Yeah,
that I agree with. I don't think that the church is too far off on that. But I think it's one of those things that there's still that hierarchy there where you got like deacons, elders, pastors, when they should just all be on the same plane.
Lady. Yeah. Or church members, and then like below church members is those who didn't fill out the membership form and such. And
I thought you were saying this. I thought you were saying it like this is actually how it's supposed to go. Like you were giving me an example.
No, that was like most churches that I've been to. It's like pastor, elders, deacons, church members, church non church goers, but they're not officially members, right? And such. And then like seemingly the further you go down, the less responsibilities you have, and, which I think elders have the most responsibility, and then deacons and underneath had the same responsibilities. Deacons are just kind of the role, the job, the role, the example to everybody else.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
We should probably do an episode sometime on church members. We touched on it just now, but like we went through pastors, what their role is, deacons, what their role is, and we should probably dive a little bit, I'm sure we will, into more of the average Christian and their life and what that should look like and entail, and how it shouldn't just be a quiet Christian life that you have no responsibilities and you're not called to help people or you're not called to teach. We touched on it a little bit, like helping people and teaching in small, areas and aspects in your daily life and the way you live and stuff. But yeah, that's all I got for deacons. There's not a ton on deacons, but
no, I think today would have been a shorter episode. But
I think people know that one pretty well, anyways. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We should do a topic on that, what you just said. But
we're going to do several, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think we'll have a couple.
Lukewarm Christianity and who goes to heaven, and do believers go to heaven, or do disciples go to heaven? And can you be a believer without being a disciple? And lots of things.
Lots of topics. Yeah. So many topics. We just got to get time now. Yeah. Time is what we need to be able to do all these topics.
Because we are working with our hands and doing this in our spare time so we can support our families.
Right. Yeah, we've got to balance family life, work life, and now this, our ministry of sorts. Mm-hmm. But we're not asking for any money, right?
Oh my gosh, no.
You want to?
No, I'm not going to ask for money.
Sure? We could just start making people pay to watch this.
Nobody would watch it.
Dang. It's probably accurate.
I wouldn't watch it if I had to pay to watch it
either. I don't even pay to watch all the stuff that I do want to watch.
You mooching off of other people's subscriptions? Like Netflix?
No, I think we have our own Netflix now, but we used to mooch off of it. I think we still mooch off Hulu off my parents. But you can have 33 people on one of those accounts. So
I don't know. Anyways, that's all I got for deacons and pastors being paid and all that.
Yeah. How much time we got on this episode?
45 minutes.
Oh, that's pretty perfect.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know if we touched on it. Deacons shouldn't be paid.
Oh yeah.
That's not even an option. You should have a separate job.
Separate job. For sure.
Not up for debate.
No, that's. I don't think deacons are paid though. Generally, in churches. I mean, I don't know.
Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Yeah, I think those.
You can close it if you like.
I don't really know if there's much to be said other than closing. Hopefully, with the whole money thing, money time tends to be a sore subject for people. Money tends to be a sore subject for people. So
it does, yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm gonna be interested to see the reactions to this particular episode.
Same.
So yeah, well, if you guys have any questions or want to leave us some comments that we are
a lot of angry pastors and deacons.
Right, we were very out of line. Yeah. Let us know. We'd love to hear them. It would be fun for us to.
You should show your father-in-law this episode. Let him watch it.
Well, he's a missionary though, so also.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's got that going for him as well. So I think he
qualifies.
He qualifies.
All right, sure.
He qualifies.
All right.
Fair enough, I suppose. But I think he would probably even agree with me to an extent.
That's good.
So, who knows?
All right.
Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next week, and we're here. You'll hear us next week if you don't actually watch this. So, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks.